Everyone. It is now officially season 3 of your favorite podcast, Catalog and Cocktails, presented by Data.World. This is a weekly live hangout, an honest, no BS, non salesy conversation about enterprise data management with tasty beverages in hand. I'm Tim Gasper, longtime data nerd and product guy at Data.World, and joined by co host Juan.
Hey, Tim, how are you doing? This is Juan Cicada, principal scientist here at Data.World, and it's not just the middle of the week and towards the end of the middle of the week, but it's also the start of the year. And what a great way to start this year by, again, just keep talking about data, what we've been doing for over 70 episodes now. It's really amazing. And today we are super excited about how we're going to start off this season because our guest is Sarah Catanzaro. She's a partner at Amplify Partners, who has been one of the lead investors and who is just she has her hands all over the place when it comes to all the modern data stack startups. I love following you on Twitter. We've had so many awesome conversations. I am so excited about our conversation today. Sarah, thank you for joining us. And how are you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing well with what I showed you before, my fancy turmeric cocktail, which is really just a turmeric shot, but stoked to have an honest conversation about data as I drink a dishonest cocktail.
Well, this is a good way to start off. So, what are we drinking and what are we toasting for? Well, Sarah, you've told us what you're drinking. How about you, Tim?
I am drinking a raspberry gin and tonic. So I thought, hey, why not add a little flavor to it? And it's not bad. I was worried it was going to taste really bad, but it's all right.
Well, I always like to see what's in my fridge and my bar kind of last minute. So the first thing that caught my eye was Kraken spiced rum. And I made some strawberry jam. I saw some raspberries and there's a lime, and let's go mix this up together. And I gave it to my wife, and she said, it's okay. I wouldn't order it, but it's okay. So, I always like to experiment on some stuff. But anyways.
That's all right. Sometimes you get it right, and sometimes it's like, whatever.
What are we going to cheers for?
Yeah, cheers. I mean, apparently, like you're both like vibing or like whatever the like Gen Z says, like with the raspberries, and I feel like I need like a raspberry to like throw in my turmeric cocktail, but like that, so.
Yeah, I don't know if the flavors will work out there, but happy New
Year. Happy New Year.
Toasting for a happy New Year. Start a fun 2022, which is going to be a lot of stuff going on. We'll chat today. So cheers.
Cheers.
So we got our warm-up, funny, ice-breaking question today, which is what was the best, worst prediction you made at the start of 2021?
Best, worst prediction I made at the start of 2021.
I'm trying to remember what predictions did we make at the beginning of 2021?
Well, I think everybody was predicting that the whole pandemic was going to kind of the summer
persist,
over, right? Yeah. So I think we all failed on that one.
That was a bad prediction.
See, I actually feel like I predicted that like it would persist like through the end of the year, and that like the vaccine wouldn't come as early. So like maybe that's a good bad prediction.
You had a realistic assessment there.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a good bad prediction has to be like about like one of the startups that I saw that I thought was like going to be floundering, but ended up like absolutely killing it. And certainly at times I can be like pretty cynical, so I'm sure that did happen at some point, but it's escaping my mind. New year, brain fog from the holidays, so I maybe we'll have to call a mulligan on that question.
How about you, Tim? Do you have one?
I don't know that I have a best worst prediction, but like if I had to split it up, like worst prediction was I was overly optimistic about the pandemic. Good prediction, but safe prediction. I don't think this was edgy enough to really be considered like a good prediction of Tim Gasper. Was like I thought DBT was going to really explode. I thought the metrics layer was going to become a thing, and it feels like it's becoming a thing. So I get a very small pin for that.
Yeah, I'm with you with on that metrics layer. Actually, kind of just a quick shout out. We're gonna have Ben Stansel in a few weeks, and we're gonna talk about metrics layer. And I remember having some conversations. We all got together with Ben, right, and folks from DBT, and also Peter Bayless from CC Data, just talking about this metrics layer stuff. I don't know, probably 6, 8 months ago, and here we are. It's getting popular. So, and that's gonna be a topic very soon. But hey, let's just dive into our discussion here. So our honest, no BS discussion. Sure. We've had several conversations. I had the opportunity to finally meet you in person a while ago. And one of the out of that conversation, one of the things that you said that was a very unique point of view was you want to have data practitioners in the boardroom. So honest, no BS. What does that even mean to have data practitioners in the boardroom?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think for like the past several years, we've been talking about like data-driven decision making. And, perhaps another question is like, what does that even mean? What does it mean to have data drive decisions? Now, ultimately, like you can't just put a data point or a chart in front of people and expect them to make decisions. In fact, like decision making and data driven decision making will be an interplay between data, different people's interpretations of it, the way in which it's communicated. But what we're doing right now is effectively saying like we're going to put some charts in a boardroom and expect people, even those without any formal training in data analysis or statistics or data viz or whatever else, to figure it out. Now, I think like ultimately that's creating missed opportunities on both sides, both on the part of the executive leadership who like can't really interact with the data. They can't ask questions about the data, how it was generated, what its limitations might be, but also on behalf of those who are producing the data, who don't have the context for what decisions are being made, what questions would be asked, what kind of quality is needed from the data. So, I don't think it's enough to put data in the boardroom. I think you need data specialists, you need data analysts or other data practitioners who can understand the way in which data is being consumed, modify the way in which data is being produced based on that context, but also, guide some of the decision making process with additional information and context.
I think this is a fascinating perspective. And I know Juan and I have been going back and forth, leading up to our conversation today, thinking a lot about this. It's clear there's a couple of trends that are sort of adjacent to this, but not as far as you're saying. And so I'm curious about how you think about those things and if they aren't far enough, right? So like one of them is obviously like data literacy, right? Like can we up level the people's, data and analytics understanding across roles, across the organization? That's one thing. And the other thing is you've got obviously the rise of the role of the chief data officer now starting to come into the boardroom, sometimes being in the boardroom, sometimes they have that title and they're not, unfortunately, right? But you've got sort of the rise of the CDO. It sounds like you're actually talking about one step further, which is like a chief analyst or like somebody who's in that room who really truly is a specialist in understanding and working with the data. Curious about how you see the interplay of what you're saying versus those two trends.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I think data literacy initiatives are very important, and I think we are seeing more and more people in positions beyond the data team develop a certain degree of data fluency, whether it's kind of building up analytical skills, learning to think about data from multiple perspectives, including thinking about like how it was generated, what its limitations might be, um, and even acquiring more technical skills like writing SQL and so on and so forth. Um, Honestly, though, I don't think that's enough
Hmm.
because your marketing executive is not going to be the person who is building your DBT data models. It's just not an efficient use of their time if you have a data team in particular. Um, Now, I find that in board meetings, I often have questions about like some of the data that is being presented that can't easily be answered because somebody who specializes in data, who knows what edge cases are associated with a revenue definition, or who can speak to the lag associated in some sort of financial reporting due to Stripe integration, is not there. Like, I consider myself a pretty highly data literate person, but the person who is ultimately accountable for the data, not just the results, is not present in the room in which the conversation is being had. And so there's this opportunity for dialogue that is just missed. Um, Ultimately, I think like we need both data literacy, and we need somebody from the data team to be having participating in those conversations. And I think there's kind of a second question, like, does that person need to be part of the executive leadership team? Like, I often see in board meetings a director of sales might be participating in a discussion, even though the company doesn't have like a chief revenue officer. I do think that more and more companies should be hiring C-level data leaders. I think data teams are most effective when they're not reporting into another org. But I think there are kind of two different issues. One is, do we need executive leadership for data teams? And the other is, should data personnel be involved in strategic conversations, or should they be at least physically or digitally present in strategic
Oh,
conversations?
interesting. Yeah, there's two dimensions to this, right? What you're saying here is is there leadership, data leadership in the room, and then are there practitioners in the room that you're not trying to kind of combine those two things. You're saying they can actually be two separate things.
I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is like anyone would be better than nothing. Like, maybe your company doesn't have a chief data officer, and it's one like you should consider that. Does your company need a chief data officer? But I feel pretty strongly convicted that like if you've got an analyst in the room, or you're going to get benefit from that. So it doesn't to be, the executive. I think like, do you need executive leadership for the data function? And do you need a data representative to participate in some of these strategic conversations? I think those two questions can be considered separately.
So have you seen this trend? Is this going on right now? I mean, you're in boardrooms, right? Are you? Is this happening now? I mean, or are you asking people to go do it so the next boarding you're going later this month or whatever, they will be there? Very curious.
Yeah, so both. We recently hired a data strategist in residence, a woman named Emily Shario, who has been attending board meetings and has been working with Amplify portfolio companies on things like their reporting, their analytics strategy, and I swear it's a revelation. Like, I'm obviously very biased here, but when you can ask questions about the reporting, when you understand the definitions, when you understand the provenance, everybody, it's just like you start speaking the same language. Everybody is kind of on a more level playing ground. Like, you've level set, and so you're not disagreeing because you have inconsistent mental models of what a data point means. You're disagreeing because there's some other fundamental source of disagreement. And I think having the clarity around data just enables you to have much richer conversations about these strategic topics, not about disparities in data, or the presentation of data.
So this is a two-way street here, right? You want to be able to have, like in the boardroom, right? The company itself having folks from their team, their data team, let it be hopefully executives, data leaders in there who can actually go in and answer those questions or provide the context where it is. And if they don't have the answer, they know exactly what's being asked and why, and provide that. But at the same time, in the boardroom, you'll have investors, whatever, like they should have their own data people come in, or they should be enough, or they should also have that data literacy so they can start asking those smart questions instead of like just expecting a number and hearing that number and I just put it into my spreadsheet, I'm done, right? I just take it for as is. So this is really interesting that it's almost like a call for arms for both sides, right? And I think that this is a very interesting point that is not common, and I really hope that we start seeing more of this.
It's like bring your data interpreter with you.
Yeah. I mean, but I think again, like you nailed it. Like it's beneficial from so many angles. The other thing that I've seen too, are there are times when the data team they're really like spinning their wheels to make sure that like a certain data point is precise. And I hear about this. I'm like, why are you doing that? I don't actually care like what the MAU number is. I care that like it's directionally correct. I care about, the month over month percent change or something like that. And the reason why I care about that is, XYZ. We're thinking about like making a new hire, or like we have, goals associated with becoming ubiquitous versus revenue goals. Uh, I feel like data teams are doing a lot of work often that they don't need to be doing, because like they don't understand the way or have visibility into the way in which data is being consumed.
All right. So I think this is an excellent point here. And I think everybody listening is all right. Make sure that in your boardroom, you have your data interpreters, whoever those are, right? From both sides, right? From the company, the startup, or whatever, and also the board and investor side. I think this is a really important takeaway that we'll have. And so I want to take this conversation now to what you're seeing, right? I mean, you are all over the place. You have an amazing overview of what's going on. And I think when we chatted before, I'm like, okay, there's just so much stuff going on with the modern data stack. There's all these companies, and I'm like, okay, magic wand, this stuff is working now. Right. We've talked about the modern data stack, like the core, right? So you got your ETL, you got your Fivetran or whatever in your L, you got your DBT, you got your Snowflake or your Databricks, and then you decide to expand on some analytics. You go do your reverse ETL, and you got your catalog, you got all that stuff. This is all working. You got your machine going chugging along. What's next? I mean, is it now great? Are we done? No, we're not done. But what is next? What are you seeing that's missing from an executive strategy, a process point of view? And I'm also curious, what is missing from a technology point of view?
Yeah. It's funny because I feel like you often hear about this notion of like pendulum IT, where companies are like swinging back and forth between like on-prem, off-prem. And I think like there is kind of a similar pattern in data, where we swing between like focusing on analysis and focusing on the underlying data. It seems like for the past 5 years or so, particularly like in the most recent 1 to 2 years, companies have really focused heavily on their data, on kind of crafting their data models, on testing and monitoring those data models, on ensuring that their metrics computations are efficient. On documenting these data sets. And I think a lot of that was kind of based on the previous experience, where companies were overly focused on analysis, and realized that like that analysis was often wrong because the underlying data was not of sufficient quality. Or they couldn't build the like prediction services that they wanted to build, because their ML models were based on data that was constantly drifting, whatever it might be. But it does feel a little bit like, in our kind of efforts to improve data quality, to shift focus from like just the analysis to the data, we've lost sight of what you do with the data. This is a question that I often ask like data leaders, like, okay, you're investing, all of this time, effort, energy in improving the quality of your data. So when your data is good, like what do you do differently? And the answer that people often like give me is like, well, then our analysis is better. And like, sure, that's a start. But I think we need to be focused more on thinking about like what not just what can we do better, but what can we do that we could not do before with data of insufficient quality. I mean, there are some areas that I've become, increasingly interested in, areas like causal inference, which I think are ripe for opportunity because it's easier to understand causality when there are fewer confounders, including confounders associated with data quality. So I think there is a lot of opportunity related to more advanced experimentation, related to observational causal inference, and perhaps if we even push the boundaries further there, into areas like parametric design or even automated hypothesis generation. I think there are other kind of topics too where we can start to engage in more advanced forms of data analysis. I think a lot of the analysis that teams have been doing for the past several years has been very metrics driven. So we're looking at aggregations, and sometimes though those aggregations kind of obfuscate a lot of interesting patterns related to user behavior or subsets of users and what they're doing. So I'm also excited about like sequence-based analytics and things of that nature.
Where do you think that some of these new types of focus, like things like hypothesis generation, causal inference, parametric design, where are these things going to manifest most? Do you think it's going to be more tooling that supports the data scientist? Is it going to kind of manifest itself in advanced features of the BI layer, or maybe all of the above? Kind of curious as to some of your thoughts there.
Yeah. That's a great question. I'll start off in like the nearest term. I think like what will happen and what will probably happen imminently is that some executive is going to say to the data team later, like, you've been investing all of this time, all of this effort, all of this money into these data models, into these like gold data sets. Like, so why? Like, show me the ROI. And I think like most of us can recognize that you know until data is acted upon, until it is transformed into some sort of like product experience, or until it informs a decision, like, it's not valuable. Data sitting in your data warehouse is just not valuable until you do something with it. I think the next step that we're seeing now is kind of the rise of operational data of some of these reverse ELT platforms where like the data is at least being piped into the surface areas, into the contexts where people are making decisions. You're seeing more and more data apps, but I think like the ROI might still it may not be enough. And so I guess the question then becomes like, where are data teams going to need to justify their existence the most? Who has invested most heavily in these initiatives related to data quality? Where they're going to need to really kind of explore the frontiers of what is possible in order to justify those investments.
Hmm.
I don't I don't know yet, but certainly the obvious answer is like the companies with the biggest data teams, the
Mhm.
companies that hired armies of people saying like, okay, as soon as we figure out this data quality thing, like goodness is going to happen.
So,
Hmm.
what one could argue then that I like this pendulum analogy, right? So we were doing all this in analytics. We realized that the stuff that we couldn't trust it because we couldn't monitor it. It was bad, whatever. So we're focused all this effort right now on clean this data and everything. So kind of the natural thing is that we're just going to go back to where we were before. And we're like, hey, now it works. It's clean and everything. We're like, okay, so you just took something that I guess was broken and now it's working. Now we can go trust it. But we were doing it, and now we are just not doing. We're not just only doing it better, but now we can trust it and everything. Okay, but this is what we were doing 5 plus 10 years ago, or even more, right? So you tell me something new, right? So at this point, one can argue that we've just spending the last decade to making sure we have strong foundations of everything, which is we need this, right? So what's next? And I think saying that we're doing what we were doing before, that's not enough, right? Because people are not.
Yeah.
I mean, that there's no ROI. We were already doing this, right? It's almost like an aspirin versus the vitamin thing. Okay, now you gave me a really great vitamin in a way. I don't know. I'm playing this. I'm just throwing this out of the top of my head here, but so now I'm very curious to get into these new areas. And I know you said causal inference, parametric design, hypothesis generation, sequence-based analytics. Let's go into this, really what this means. And I would love to get some examples from you of what you're seeing or what should be the art of the possible that you're looking for as investor.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I mean, I think like where I see like the more advanced companies are at is like experimentation. So you've got like, your data models, you've got your metrics, like how do you generate ROI from them? Well, like you run experiments. And I think like many executives can also understand the value of experiments because so many of us were trained in like the scientific method in elementary and middle school. Like you can understand the notion that like you run an experiment, you collect data, you analyze that data, and from that data, you generate a conclusion, and that conclusion has impact. So experimentation seems to be like where many companies are at right now. But then you start kind of like dragging innovation into experimentation. You start moving from like, you know, two sample t-tests to like contextual bandits. And I think like that again is where you start to see some like really exciting things where you're not just testing hypotheses, you're testing multiple hypotheses, you're generating hypotheses. um that's kind of the area that's super exciting to me, like moving beyond the A/B test to advanced experimentation. I think the other thing that is also exciting though is like sometimes you can't always run an experiment. Sometimes you don't have the sample size. Sometimes you maybe don't have like the right context for feature flagging or assignment, and so many questions that businesses ask, like they are about causality, or they do require some understanding of like mechanism of action. And I think observational causal inference is another field that has been like relatively underexplored, perhaps for some good reasons. But I'm hoping that within the next several years, like some of the technologies, including for example, to like validate causal models, will improve, exist, and unlock more opportunities there.
Hmm. This whole topic is fascinating, and it reminds me and makes me think of some of the experimentation platforms that exist out there that are focused more around, let's say, things like e-commerce or things like personalization, right? You have sites like or services like Optimizely and things like that, right, where they're trying to do like A/B testing and things like that. But it's sort of focused on certain use cases. It's interesting to think about how technology and then obviously people in process can help with other kinds of feedback loops, other kinds of decision cycles, and it doesn't seem like, and maybe this is part of your sort of your thesis here, is that like it seems like there's a lot of missing pieces to really make that effective, but the potential is very high. Like when you're looking at like web analytics, for example, you've got a lot of data already that is sort of observing the behavior of users and things like that. And in some cases you have that within, other use cases in the business, but in other cases you don't. Like there isn't enough observational data about that. Is that another key part of all of this, is like having more observational information about your business, like taking this concept of event tracking and not just thinking of it as like people clicking on websites and starting to bring it to other parts of the business? I don't know, kind of just brainstorming here. Curious as to your thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, kind of takes me in like two different directions. One is actually like revisiting the topic that we were talking about earlier, that this notion of like the need for data practitioners in the boardroom. I think one of the most compelling reasons to include data people in the boardroom is that there are so many topics that could benefit from additional data, from additional, observations. Um, that data teams are not typically focused on. One that comes to mind, for example, is hiring. Like so many early stage startup board conversations really hinge on like hiring. Uh, who are our like highest priority hires? Who do we need to add to the leadership team? Uh, why are we hiring faster or slower than anticipated? And a lot of those discussions could actually be improved or could be informed by additional data. But like recruiting analytics, hiring analytics is not typically a focus for data teams. Instead, they're focused more on like product analytics or like financial reporting. So I think there are all of these kind of domains where we're not collecting data or we're not analyzing data, that data practitioners would have more visibility into if they were participating in those discussions. The other thing that I've been thinking a lot about, and I haven't yet formed conclusions about what this necessarily means, but in the past like 10 years or so, I think like we've often talked about like data as exhaust, or as the role of the data team as being to analyze like digital exhaust. So the data team, we talk about like data preparation, data cleaning, et cetera. Like the data team is essentially given exhaust and said like, make this into something valuable. Now, what if like the data team was not analyzing exhaust? What if the data team was analyzing data that was purpose built for its function? The area where I see this, I think, most clearly is, event tracking. For years, I think like data teams have been responsible for trying to understand user behaviors, but they do so by looking at logs and events that were really designed to determine, is our app running, like is the site down,
Mm-hmm.
or to like power the app functionality. The events were not defined and implemented for the purpose of understanding user behavior. Now I'm starting to see more teams kind of transition to a model where when a new feature is released, the data team is involved in that process and has the opportunity to kind of define their requirements. Like what data do they need, not just what will be available to them to determine if that feature release was successful or not, or if the hypotheses that the company had about that product change were correct. This feels significant. Like this feels significant that data teams are not just going from analyzing digital exhaust to analyzing a new set of data that is purpose built for analysis. But I'm still thinking through kind of the implications of that.
Yeah. We even think about this at data.world a lot when we're thinking about like how do we track analytics of our own platform, is this concept of semantic events that are
Mm.
much more useful from an analytic perspective rather than just the broader data exhaust. And Unfortunately, I'm sure many companies struggle with this. Sometimes it's hard to really go get up front, be proactive, and do a lot of that semantic event collection because you have to be proactive about it. And a lot of times you're like, oh, wait, I wish we had tracked this event instead of having these 10 sort of loosely connected events. And I don't know, it's interesting to think about how we can do a better job of, I'm sure there's a lot of things that can help here, but one of them is like empowering and enabling these upstream teams to be thinking about their downstream consumers, right? Which starts to connect into, I know what our next topic is going to be, is around sort of like decentralization, data mesh, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up one of the reasons I am just so lucky I get to do this podcast is because we get to talk to so many people and start connecting dots that we didn't know were there. And this just what you just said is connecting the dot from I listened to the podcast that Shamak did at the data engineering podcast, and I connected that dot with the previous episode we had with Mohammed Sadiq, who was a former VP of engineering of Intuit. And it's all about, and that connects to what we've done also with data-centric architecture with Dave McComb. So here's what I'm hearing right now is I'm going to read something I wrote about this stuff here, is that the application developers, they produce the data, but at the end of the day, they're also the consumers of that data. And this gap is what we need to go close, and we need to have that feedback. But the problem is that the app developers, they don't own their data, and the whole point is that they should be owning their data. And this is, so the question is, does the responsibility, where does the responsibility of data land? And we've talked about this before, Sarah. We're having an email exchange about like, wait, so does it mean that the software engineers now have to be responsible not only for software but for data? I don't know, maybe. And guess what? When we had that conversation with Mahmoud, his point was like, yes, this is an engineering problem. The VP of engineering, the CTO, should be the person who is owning and responsible for that. And this is connected to also what Dave McComb talks about, his whole data-centric architecture, right? You need to have a simple, single, extensible model. So if we really start thinking about this, and you have your extensible model of the core concepts in the organization, you define your applications, and that log data you're generating, it's not just like, oh, that's the side work that I did. No, that's actually beautiful data that is well modeled, that goes off into logs, but that other people are going to go analyze that, and they don't have to go figure out what this stuff means because it's actually connected directly to what the application was doing, because the application and the business models are all working together. So going into the whole data mesh, and even in that past episode, I remember the question about that they asked Shamak was about data jobs, right? What are going to be the next jobs? And she said the impact of data mesh is, if data mesh is a success, there will only be engineers. All these kind of rainbow of data roles should go away because they're just these intermediate roles to fill in the gaps, but they're actually generating more gaps. This is truly changing so much from a technology perspective. Like you're telling me that we have to go develop software that's connected with the data models that's generate the data. Who are the people who's responsible? Our software engineers need to go data. We talk about data, bringing the data team to the business units, but now we're bringing the data team into the software engineering. This is a huge different thing of what we've been doing. And I think this is what's super exciting. We need something different. All right, that was my rant.
No, I love it. Although, like, I would take issue with the notion that like everybody is going to become engineers. One of the things that I feel like is so undervalued in like the world is that analysis is a skill set. Like engineering, building things and analyzing things, not the same skill. So like I think in perpetuity, like there will be needs for data analysis, there will be needs for engineering, and like sometimes those may converge in the same person. But if I had like any gripe about data and the data ecosystem, it would be like the number of companies that just act as if like analysis is intuition. Like it's not. That's why there's analysis and there's intuition anyway. But I think one of the things that kind of I missed early on when thinking about some of these notions of data mesh and decentralized accountability for data versus like centralized accountability for data. Like I was very focused on who should be accountable for data. When data is treated as a product, like who is the product owner, where the answer to who was like what role, what person. And I think my objection to the notion that engineers should be responsible and accountable for data quality and the quality of data products was that engineers have to be responsible and accountable for the quality and delivery of software and features, and like we can't keep adding things to the list of like job requirements for any given role. But I think who, like what person, what role is probably like the wrong abstraction. I think like we need to start thinking more about teams. And I think the notion that product teams should be responsible for data quality for data products is very reasonable. Now, I think that does lead to kind of a new way of organizing data teams where you have analytics engineers, data analysts embedded into product teams who can work with other engineers to instrument new features, to determine the event schemas and such, and who have visibility into both how the data is generated and then how it is consumed downstream. So I have really kind of come around to this idea that product teams can be accountable for data quality and data product, um, eh, albeit perhaps not like product engineers.
I like what you're proposing here because it feels like, I mean, maybe the ultimate sort of edgy vision is a little bit like what Mamad is talking about in terms of like, oh, engineers are engineers and they can kind of accomplish all these things. But if we start to think of product teams as having data expertise and, if we're thinking in data mesh terms, like the decentralized component, right, the domain component, like being embedded as part of them, maybe that's sort of an incremental improvement that we can make here to get data to become more, data, but also, downstream analysis and semantics and things like that to be more of a first stream, a first class citizen when we're building these products, sort of embedded within that process, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, think about it. Like, what if product teams or product engineering teams were not just responsible for delivering features, but if the successful delivery of a feature hinged on being able to objectively evaluate if that feature changed user behavior or impacted the company's other strategic objectives in a meaningful way. Now, I
Right.
think like that definition of uh, software development of feature delivery, application delivery, um, it is more kind of inclusive of data. I think it's that sort of like behavioral change or that sort of perspective that helps us move closer to data driven decision making.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're saying like there is software, there is product, there is data, and there's decisions, and these are all like very discrete units, and we're not going to pay attention to like the interfaces between those.
Right. Well, and I think we're getting some confirmation also from some folks over on the social platforms here. Seeing Steve-O posting on Facebook saying, depending on the value stream of teams, they can be composed of app developers and data analysts. And it's actually a common Scrum practice to have self-sufficient teams. And I agree with that in spirit. Although I'd love to see more folks do that. I feel like we don't see enough of that actually in practice, perhaps in spirit or in framework, but there needs to be more of that actually happening.
Yeah. I mean, I go back to the notion too that like the data for analysis of user behaviors needs to be treated as a first class citizen. We can't just have data analysts responsible for examining digital exhaust. Like I don't know how we convinced ourselves that, companies could be data driven when they were using exhaust. So I think, this sort of organizational pattern will help us get to a better place where you don't honestly have to do as much like data preparation and testing and monitoring, et cetera, because like the data that data teams are working with is just like inherently better.
Well, this has been a fascinating discussion. I think we need to start wrapping up. And as I told you, Sarah, we could just talk for hours here, and we got so much notes here. But we're going to move on to our lightning round, which is presented by Data.World, who thankfully lets us do all this, lets us spend our time to go have this podcast. Data.World, the world's only truly data catalog that is cloud native. And with that, I'm going to kick it off with the first lightning round question. So, number one.
Let's do it.
Will the data practitioner role in the boardroom benefit from being an executive level, like a chief analyst, or is that unnecessary?
Yes.
So
it has an executive. Yes, it will be. Hey, that was a trick question.
That was a trick question.
No, it's not unnecessary. Yes, it will be beneficial to have executive leaders for data functions.
Awesome. So next lightning round question. So we talked about data practitioners in the boardroom. Should we also be bringing live analysis and data science tools into the boardroom? AKA, let's try to say bye-bye to slides.
Ooh. Eventually, am I allowed to say that? Not yet.
That's fair. We'll get there.
More data literacy first, then we can move to like real time and different forms of like data reporting.
So, are we going to stop analyzing digital data digital exhaust data?
We should. Probably not going to do it. In the data world, or like in the world, we never do what we should be doing with data. So that's the cynical outlook.
Yeah, what we should be doing versus reality, perhaps for a while, right? All right, last lightning round question for you. I'm going to ask you to put your sort of prognosticator's hat on. So 10 years from now, does the modern data stack still look like it does? Warehouse Lake, Transform, BI, data integration, or do you foresee a radical shift? And I know 10 years is a long time, and you probably have a few different trends you're looking at, but do you foresee a radical shift in the next 10 years on the modern data stack?
Yes, the modern data stack I think is still very like batch based, and frankly I think like streams are a better representation of the world, a better abstraction for reality.
Okay, I'm adding another one here. I was curious based on the last discussion we had. So
bonus round.
Bonus round. Will we be seeing data engineers, analytics engineers part of the product team anytime soon in the next couple of years?
Oh yeah, for sure. Again, and I think like it should be that way.
I love it. Right. Let's make it happen.
Yeah,
I love this. This is exactly the discussions we need to be having. We want people to be listening to this, and I'm actually now curious. Like, is this like a big foreign concept? Are people like, what are you talking about? Or are people like, no, this makes sense. Let me start making some changes or figuring out how to go make these changes. How are you seeing this?
Yeah, I think people acknowledge that though it makes sense, but I think like they see things somewhat incrementally. Like, okay, we need to like centralize our data team before we can decentralize our data team. We need to build our set of data models before we can like go embed analytics engineers into product teams. I don't know that is actually necessary. I don't know that like centralization is a tax that you have to pay on your way to decentralization, but don't quote me on that. I don't know. It doesn't mean I know, but I'm not saying.
It means you don't know. We hear that.
We appreciate it. Honest, no BS here.
That's it. All right. Well, it's our TTT. Tim takes it away with takeaways first.
All right.
You go.
I'll do some initial takeaways. I mean, first of all, thanks, Sarah. There's so much gold here. Such great conversation. It's been a true pleasure. And I think the biggest takeaway what we started with was around, when you're trying to drive data-driven decisions, you need to have the people who know in the room where it's happening, and that's data people, data practitioners in the boardroom. And that's a key shift from how people are often thinking, that the data people are sort of the elves in the background building the toys so that the boardroom people can bring in their nice slides and kind of, talk to them and things like that. But then you have questions and you're like, well, how did you get to that number? And, well, could we run this experiment? And bringing that data expertise in the room, in addition to trying to drive data literacy, in addition to trying to empower with self-service tooling and things like that, can be really, really impactful. So really great takeaway. And I think can be something that people put into action right away. Invite your analyst, your best analyst, bring them to the room, let them be there. Right. So I think that's super cool. And Juan, what were your key takeaways?
Well, I like this analogy of the whole pendulum IT, which basically the takeaway of this is like, we're just doing what we were supposed to be doing 10 years ago or 5 years ago, whatever. Okay, we're finally getting to that point, right? So yeah, we were focusing on analysis and realized stuff was wrong. So that's why this pendulum has gone to the other side. And now we've been focusing on crafting our data models, documenting, monitoring, make sure the data has high quality and so forth. So it's that when we go back, we can now go do our analytics. But the question there is, you're investing all this time to improving the quality. So what? What's next, right? Doing it better, analysis is better, but that's just the start. And I think people are asking now, their data leaders, you've been investing so much into this data, to creating this beautiful data. What is the ROI on this? Having that data, just having this clean, beautiful data sitting in your data warehouse by itself is not doing anything. Metrics, yeah, that's the starting point, but we got to do more of that. So I'm really liking the thinking about what's next. Let's go run more experiments, right? I mean, it's something we've been doing, but like, what is the next wave of running experiments? So we've talked a little bit about causal inference. I think there's opportunities to go dive a lot more into this. And causal inference is really interesting because those are the questions that the business, that the executives are asking about. Hypothesis generation, right? All this type of stuff. This is the next type of stuff that people are asking that we don't have, that we're not doing right now. And a lot of the focus today is on product analytics, and there's some other areas that we could be focusing on analytics, like you mentioned, like HR analytics. So basically, there's a lack of data. I think those are opportunities where we can go start doing the next things. And we've been talking about this whole who's accountable for the data. Is if we push this to the engineering team, is it engineering responsible? Your point is no, because they're responsible for software. But the answer here, it seems to be able to bring in those data folks inside of the product team. I think that's that, and I agree with that. I think it's unreasonable to think that the engineers are going to go be responsible for everything. Something key that you said was building things and analyzing things are very different skills. So how did we do on our takeaways? Anything else?
Nailed it. No, nailed it. And I liked, the holiday spirit and the analogy of like the data elves preparing for the Christmas board meeting. But
maybe 3 weeks too late in terms of an analogy, but still prudent. I still like it.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, let me throw it back to you. 2 questions. What's your advice about data, about life or whatever? And second, who should we invite next?
Yeah, I mean, if I had like 3 takeaways based on this discussion, it would be invite data practitioners to your board meetings and other strategic conversations. Understand how you are going to use data and take that into consideration as you are thinking about how it needs to be prepared and presented. And don't treat data like exhaust. If you think data is valuable, it's more valuable than exhaust. So that's my 3. And then the second question was,
who should we invite next?
Oh yeah, of course. Chad Sanderson at Convoy, I think, has like a very nuanced and unique way of thinking about like valuing data and determining where to make investments in the like data foundations that do relate the way in which data will be consumed and the way in which data can impact the business to the kind of requirements or technical requirements for the underlying data. So
So you said
Chad up
Chad
next.
Sanderson.
Yeah.
Chad Sanderson from Convoy?
Yes.
Well, what a coincidence, because we literally connected on LinkedIn earlier this week. And I think yesterday we
Nice.
had a conversation, and it was 30 minutes of just like, oh my God, like you get me, I get you. Like, this is so awesome. And he was telling me everything that they've been talking, just building over there. And I'm like, wow. And he's literally doing the whole pushing it into the engineers and everything. All right, Chad, we have an upcoming meeting, but we're going to do
You're
catalog
up.
and cocktails soon. This is awesome. Again, so
Nice.
many dots getting connected. This is so cool.
I know.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much. Just one quick announcement. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we don't know. There's this Data Council AI conference in Austin, January 27th, 28th. You'll be there. We'll be there. Hopefully it happens. We may have some private or non-private or hidden or unhidden catalog and cocktails meetup, because a lot of previous guests and upcoming guests will be there, so it'll be fun. And then next week we're gonna have Emily Hawkins from Drizzly. She's just doing so much stuff on the whole analytics engineering space and doing courses and stuff. She's a fantastic member of the community, and we'll be talking about modern data stack from the trenches. Sarah, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And we also thank you to Data World, who supports us on Catalog and Cocktails. Have a great Wednesday and a great start of the year.
Thank you. Happy New
Cheers.
Year and enjoy
Happy
the
New Year.
raspberries.